this video, I will explain Chapter 1, David's story from English coursebook. Before we begin, let's start with a brief introduction of the chapter so you all can have an idea of the story. We all know that our life is the most precious gift given to us by God. But sometimes we forget that our casual approach towards life can spoil it forever. We will learn in the story how a wrong decision led to a devastating result that cut short a promising life. The narrator of the story is a girl named Tete who is grieving over the death of her best friend, David. The story begins with a phone call to Tete from David's father. It was 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. He called to inform that David had passed away the other night. She mourned the death of her best friend, and she described how David's family were dealing with the loss of their son. They loved him immensely, and his mother even had to quit her job in order to take care of David during his illness. Here the narrator recalled how they met when he was 16 years old and she had joined class 10 in his school. And as she was a shy girl, David approached her, and from that day on, he became her best friend. Their friendship grew and they got to know each other very well. She goes on to say that David's story is one of courage because even though he had been diagnosed with HIV, a fatal disease that would destroy his immune system and eventually lead to AIDS and death, he did not give up. He did not quit his football team. He played the game despite all the pain and going through many hospitalizations. She often visited him at home and in the hospital as well. Deep down, David knew that she was curious to know and that there were many questions she wanted to ask him about his illness. Then, one morning, when she went to visit him in the hospital, she held his hand as he was going through different blood tests. She finally found the courage to ask him how someone like him, who is a great football player, a brilliant student, and the class captain, got such a dreadful disease. He then told her about his old girlfriend, whom he met when he had gone for the summer holidays to his grandparents' place in the neighboring town. He told her that she was very beautiful, energetic, and carefree, and that they dated for a few weeks, and he thought back about the happy times they spent together, riding bikes and the football games they had watched. Then he told her in a hurtful voice about the night they had crashed a friend's birthday party. He said that there were a lot of people at the party and drinks were passed around and everyone was in a cheerful mood. Then his cousin came and offered him with a glass. David hesitated and he knew that it was not good for him, but his cousin continued to persuade him to drink, so he took it and carried on throughout the night. He slightly remembered being with her all night. Then, the next morning, he realized that he had made a mistake and had regretted that night ever since. The narrator saw her best friend, David, was now a broken boy with broken dreams and full of regret. Even though she understood his pain, she could not help him, but wondered how a bad decision could destroy such a strong, lively, and compassionate person. She knew that David had poured out his heart confessing and sharing his deep regret to her. Even though David's health was getting worse, he was always filled with a sense of humor and would always put a happy face for everyone around him. On several occasions, he would advise her about how beautiful and precious life is, and that it should not be taken for granted. He would tell her to be proud of herself and to hold her head high and love herself. The narrator then asked David how to love herself, to which he replied that loving oneself does not necessarily mean putting one's need above someone else's. It does not mean that one should become proud or arrogant. What it means is that as there is only one life and no one can give a second life, it is precious and therefore we should respect it and take good care of it. He would urge her and beg her to learn from his mistakes. Having a good time and enjoying life does not mean putting our life at risk, and that good relationship depends on respect and trust. He begged her to promise him that she would value her life and know that it is precious. He also advised her that if she happened to go to a party or to any get-together, she should be careful and to always weigh her decisions. Also, not to be afraid to say no to her friends or anyone else for that matter if they pressure her to do something she should not be doing. It is her life and no one should decide how she should live it. The narrator promised David, and towards the end of his life, he was admitted to a nursing home. On his final days, though he was weak and tired, he would still greet everyone happily. A year after David's death, the narrator went to his grave with flowers in her hands. She stood beside his grave, looking back at the moments they spent together and reflecting on the advice he had given her. She was filled with a deep sense of peace and well-being. And as she was going back home, there was no doubt in her mind, as she was not alone. She sensed that David was watching over her with love and concern. She walked home, held her head high, valuing her life and ready to face life's challenges with courage and confidence. So the story ends on that note, and with that we have come to the end of the session. That is all for today's video.